I'm Justin McLaughlin, your host for this panel discussion on social selling. Digital disruption has forced sales and marketing teams to develop new ways to engage their customers throughout the buying cycle. For many, social selling has provided an effective way to get connected with customers earlier and more frequently. According to research from Aberdeen Group, 72% of salespeople using social selling as part of their sales process outperformed their peers and exceeded quota 23% more often. With so much at stake, and with so much potential promise, organizations are feeling the urgency to implement an effective social selling strategy. But what does that look like? Who's involved, and how do you measure the ROI? We'll discuss these questions and more over the next 30 minutes. I'm delighted to be joined by Kevin Scott, Head of Sales Solutions in EMEA for LinkedIn, Carmel Boyle, who is Director of Sales and Programs and Social Media for Oracle EMEA, and Mark Levinson, Service Director for SiriusDecisions. So Mark, what is the difference between good sales networking and social selling? Shouldn't reps really already be using social channels for their networking?
So they certainly should be using those social channels. And I think a lot of sales reps have great networking skills. The challenge becomes, how do we start to translate what is basic networking over into social media tools and the combination of using some of those previous skills in a new way?
That's right.
And it's really about enabling them to understand how to do it well. It's a learned element that we have to be able to translate for these sales reps. We can't just go out and say, start using social media, it's a great networking tool, and go. We have to give them some kind of insight into best practices. And part of that is really on sales enablement as a function and those sales managers within an organization to really help them understand and be coached into the best ways to use social media tools today.
Mm-hmm. And Kevin, where would you say that selling comes into play with social selling? How much selling do we actually see on social channels?
Yeah, well, actually quite a lot. If we think how the buying journey has really changed for buyers over the last few years, a lot of buyers are more than half, 60% of the way through their buying process before they ever talk to a salesperson. So if you think of that from a sales perspective and sales management perspective, the opportunity for your buyer to engage with you, to actually understand your competitive offering, the value that you bring to an organization, is so much later in the process. Now, the point of engaging on social media and on social media platforms such as LinkedIn Sales Navigator is that you get an opportunity to share content, to establish your brand, and to really enhance your professional reputation and share value and engage with the buyers that are already engaging on that network.
Yeah. It's an interesting perspective, not only for the sales reps to sort of represent their brand, but it's a great opportunity for brands to represent their brands as well, for organizations, working with sales and marketing together to really show kind of how you can re-emphasize your brand identity.
Oh, absolutely, and I think what you see with social media is the opportunity for marketing and sales to come together, much more so than I think ever has happened before. Sure. I mean, typically the silos between marketing and sales have been there for many, many years. If you think of the opportunity to share content and to engage on a social media platform, the ability for marketing to leverage salespeople's networks is an incredible opportunity. And if you were to add all of the people that are in your salespeople's networks together, frequently that's a much greater number than all of the people that typically visit a corporate website.
Sure.
So it's a massive opportunity for marketing and sales to work together.
Yeah. Interesting. So Carmel, obviously, you have implemented a social selling strategy here at Oracle. From your perspective, how do you see kind of the selling taking place across social selling?
Well, definitely, I would agree with Kevin. From our experience in Oracle, we've implemented it now across EMEA with our sales reps, and certainly it is impacting our pipeline and revenue. Yeah. We measure very closely what matters in terms of both qualitative and quantitative metrics, looking at the improvement in terms of the connections, the reach that Kevin talked about, the quality of those connections, seniority, are they net new names for the organisation, or are they really going deeper into our install base? But in addition to that, we also look then at the sales rep. what's motivating them to actually share content, to engage with what marketing are providing, and really driving the business forward. So internally we've done a lot of PR and I suppose capture those success stories to really drive the adoption. And a lot of the reps are telling us, for example, that it's the end of cold calling for them. It's actually, you know, the evolution of selling for them and opening doors to key decision makers and helping them find those decision makers, ultimately listen to them on social networks, then engage and progress and find pipeline and opportunities.
So I guess, you know, the logical question is, you know, what does a social strategy look like? You know, how do you best implement it? You know, that's something that obviously you've done, Karma. What, you know, from your experience, what does that look like?
Yeah, we started the journey in Oracle and initially was with a small pilot of reps, and we really scaled and grew it, you know, as we could see the improvement and the adoption. I think there are a number of elements in terms of a social selling strategy that you need to consider, and to agree with Mark's point, certainly enablement is key. You can give a rep a tool, any tool, but really it's about them understanding the business value and really setting key milestones in the project. What does success look like for your organisation? What do you want to improve? And then measuring against that. In addition, it's the tools and making sure that the reps are comfortable. I think it's important as well to start with one or two platforms of choice and really perfect and master those rather than going too big too quickly. And I would also say for us internally, senior executive sponsorship was key as well. Really ensuring that your senior management team understand the value. So we brought in colleagues from LinkedIn actually to do training for our management team, help them improve their own social profile and presence so that our reps could see that this was something at all levels in the organisation that was being adopted and driven. So the final point I would say is content. That's critical, and I think that's where marketing really adds huge value to the overall process. It's important to help reps understand where to find content, to fish for content, whether that's Oracle content, for example, but also could be third-party content, you know, a good article from Forbes to The Economist, etc., relevant for their marketplace, and then to help reps actually curate and create their own content, whether that's a LinkedIn post, a blog, you know, Twitter. They need to be comfortable and really use all of those sources. So we've worked very closely with our marketing teams here in Oracle to do that and to provide localized content, which we call touch points content, really to help the reps, you know, start that, I suppose, discussion, be part of the buyer's journey, and to have relevant content. Because I think it's assumed that about 11 pieces of content are consumed by a buyer as they go through that journey. So you need different types of content, you know, that's engaging and relevant.
Wow, that's great, interesting. So Mark, maybe from an industry perspective, you know, what do you see in terms of social selling strategies and how they're implemented and how they're effectively managed?
Absolutely, and I think to add on to what Karma was just talking about, the internal aspects of a strategy are really critical. Yeah. It builds the consistency, it makes that connection between marketing and sales being aligned and working together. But we can't forget about the external influence, which is our buyers. What are our buyers doing from a social aspect? We can put a lot of effort as an organization to building out a social media strategy and a social selling strategy, but if we're looking at particular personas that aren't spending a lot of time in certain social channels, we're putting a lot of effort and resources against something that's not really going to help us engage with our buyer. Sure. So we have to bring that buyer aspect in. The other component is around governance. We're giving now a lot of responsibility to our sales organization to become brand ambassadors for our organizations. Yeah. And the ability to control that is starting to become very challenging. It's open, it's free. People have personal aspects from a social standpoint that they bring into the equation. So to put a governance policy in place within the organization is really important to build consistency in what is the brand. So if you have a sales rep from Oracle who's spending time posting content, engaging with buyers, what messaging are they saying? What are they talking about? What type of things are they trying to do through social to connect with buyers? And does it meet the overall strategy from an organizational standpoint in how we want to attract buyers? And are we doing it the right way into the right buyer community? And at the end of the day, it's also a protection so that we don't drive buyer confusion, we don't put mixed messages out there. And there's a lot of pitfalls that we can start to find, especially where all of a sudden the professionalism or the days of sales really having a persona of their own start to degrade. Because now we start talking in one-sentence responses on Twitter. How much can you really tell? What's the right verbiage? How do you really do it from a good messaging standpoint? So I think bringing that buyer aspect in so we know who we're trying to connect with, and then really developing an overall corporate governance policy around social media is critical in the overall strategy to ensure that we're really getting the value out of any kind of social activity that we might be driving.
So there's an interesting play there. You know, it's if you think about sort of a social identity, and who really owns that? Is it the sales rep? Is it the brand? You know, and how does that marry up?
Exactly, and I think that is important. So we see a lot of organizations, back to my enablement comment, that are spending time in helping sales reps who may have been using LinkedIn as an example for a number of years, but they may have been using it for their own personal use to be able to find the opportunity they're now engaged with. So how do we now make sure there's consistency in that profile? Everything from the picture that I may put up on my profile page to the type of messaging or conversations I may drive. Because I'm now carrying the representation that anything I may push through social has a connection back to the organization that I work for. And that's important. And it is hard because at the end of my time or my tenure with a particular organization, that's still me. That's still my content. I still have connections to that, even once I may move on from a current opportunity. So how does that continue? How do you control that once the expanse of the organizational management starts to disappear because I've moved to another career opportunity? So there's a lot of work that has to be done on the company side to really allow social selling to be a huge benefit for sales reps.
I mean, Mark makes a great point. The importance of the personal brand in social selling is paramount. Yeah. People used to, in the old days, go on LinkedIn to create as an online CV, and that's fine if you wanted to find a new job. But as a salesperson, the opportunity to engage with your buyer before a meeting, before a conversation, typically that buyer will look you up on LinkedIn. If all you're communicating is what a good salesperson I am, you've missed such an opportunity to communicate and start a conversation with that buyer. So you can use your profile and leverage that profile to build a brand, to communicate value, to help qualify for your buyer what an essential asset you actually are for their organization. So we really do need to encourage salespeople to think not of their LinkedIn profile as an online CV, but much more as a personal brand opportunity and a corporate brand opportunity to position them and the value that they're going to add.
Carmel, you know, from your experience, you know, how have you guys approached sort of the brand versus the personal ownership?
Really, I would agree with Kevin and Mark's comments so far. Certainly, we have trained and enabled our reps to really look at their social profiles to be, as we call it, kind of socially complete and socially compliant. So it's very much helping them with what looks good in terms of a profile, their headline, their professional photograph, and the content they're sharing. They do need to obviously reveal a little bit about themselves personally. It, you know, can't all be about the brand. People buy from people, so ultimately we want to keep that individual nature of engagement through social. In addition then, we've also definitely focused and trained our reps on the social media policy, just to ensure that they feel comfortable, that they know what they can share, and ultimately that they will engage. That's also, there is a fear factor sometimes with sales that they feel they shouldn't, but actually it's by encouraging them and showing them the etiquette, the do's and don'ts, and the best practices. And again, that's back to, in an organisation, really identifying your social champions and your advocates, and having that peer examples really for us has driven the right behaviour, and that reps see it's actually credible and it does show results for them.
Sure, yeah. You know, another question is, who owns social selling? Is it a marketing responsibility? Is it a sales responsibility? I'm sure it's somewhere in the middle, but you know, Mark, where are you seeing sort of organizations kind of, you know, figure that out?
Sure. If we think about the social selling process, it's really starting to get ownership in sales enablement as a distinct function, where that's the function that's going to drive the right skills, the knowledge, and the overall processes that a sales rep really has to understand to be able to be good at social selling. Where the alignment comes in that Kevin mentioned before is a lot of the programs that are run through those social channels are coming from marketing. So what is that messaging? What types of content pieces might be pushed out there? So there's a definite alignment from sales and marketing. There's one other role that we do see coming into a lot of large B2B organizations, and it's back to my conversation around governance, and that's kind of a social operations role that looks at the overall social footprint within an organization to ensure that consistency, that ease of use, the decisions of which social platforms should we be using and for what reasons. So there needs to be kind of that overarching role. And like I said, the title that we're seeing is this social operations, which usually fits within a communications group within an organization. So it's connected to brand, it's connected to messaging, it has that marketing touch point to be able to understand what are we able to create and build from a social aspect, as well as a connection back to what does the company as a whole really want their social footprint to look like, so they can take that overall consistent governance as well.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I think also it's worth understanding, tying that back to the strategy, what you're actually trying to accomplish organizationally. And the responsibility for driving sales improvement is fundamentally at the chief executive. Mm-hmm. So if we think and you drive that down through an organization in terms of improving sales process, at the end of the day, we're trying to improve top and bottom lines and customer satisfaction at the end of the day. So the responsibility we've increasingly seen for executing these programs is typically with sales management. And we saw initially marketing playing a very strong role because social media got branded in with sort of the initiatives that marketing were doing. And they definitely picked up the baton and started to run with it. But I think where we've seen organizations now really take this and where it's becoming pervasive is the sales organization is grabbing that baton and running with it, because it's now it's a different way of operating. Yeah. You know, the cold calling methods, calling rates and touch rates are just the old way of running business. We need new KPIs. Sure. And you do need to think about how you're engaging in social selling a little bit differently and restructure your organization. So, for example, a sales manager now may want to start measuring the number of connections you have to decision makers within a specific company. That delivery of that KPI is done through the daily work you do using Sales Navigator or LinkedIn or another social selling platform. But the key metric is really how you're engaging with decision makers. How are you strengthening your relationship as an organization into your prospective customer? And so that's a fundamental shift, I think, away from the old ways of selling to the new ways of selling, which we're now calling social selling.
Yeah.
And I think, Kevin, you bring up a great point around the measurement side of this. It's also a change in the way we're measuring our business. Right. So as we think about things like, how long does it take to build strength in a relationship? How can we get that to a connection? How can we convert that to a lead? How can we convert that to an opportunity? If we look at those and understand where we're using social tools to help build that, are we able to start to measure things like less time to conversion, greater ability to better understand the overall contacts within an account? Are we really increasing the productivity of a sales rep through this, or are you just layering another set of activities on top of what they're already doing without being able to see the benefits? And I think there's a lot of organizations that are layering in social capabilities without an end goal, without really defining what is it that we're trying to accomplish from a productivity standpoint by putting social activity at the top of the priority list for our sales reps. So I think that measurement comment is so important. And this now brings in sales operations into the equation, to your point, as sales takes a greater ownership and we want to be able to measure. Now we're looking at, well, how are we tracking this? How are we trending it? Is it showing up in dashboards? What do managers need to know versus reps? So really kind of tying the activity to results is where organizations need to then come back and say, we're doing the right things from a social aspect. We should focus on these versus those. Versus the, hey, we just heard other companies are doing X and Y. We must do that also because it must be the right thing. Yeah. No, wait, is that right for your business? Is it getting you results that you want? Yeah. So we have to bring that measurement conversation into it as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I guess, at the end of the day, it is about the results and success. So what does that look like for social selling? You know, what does that is it numbers? Is it stories? Is it, you know, what do you see sort of kind of in the market?
Yeah, I think the big change is really coming around activities linked to productivity for the sales organization. I don't think there's a lot of businesses out there that are truly finding a lead, qualifying it, creating an opportunity, and closing business 100% social.
Right.
It's a component that drives that.
Yeah.
Much of which I think is really on the front end as we see it. So discovering new contacts within a business, creating relationships, better qualifying lead potential, and then building the length of that. So as we talk about customer experience, it's that ongoing life cycle. So what can I now do, even if you've become a customer? How do I now start to seed and nurture you through the relationship? How do I start to research and find a lot more information? So it's much more of the enablement components that help a rep be more effective and efficient.
Right.
Effective being I can get to information faster. Efficient says I can now, if you think about the comparison we asked earlier of networking to social selling, networking, lots of phone calls, going to events. If I'm trying to get a reference or a warm intro into a particular contact, it may take me 5, 6 touch points. Versus now, from a social aspect, I can go out to my entire network who I already know may have a connection to somebody and say, who can help me get that introduction? Sure. So the ability to be much more efficient is there. Yeah. So I think what we're really focusing and seeing organizations spend time is that upfront part for reps of driving relationships and building knowledge around the buyers and accounts they're trying to connect to, and their ability to make that connection at a greater velocity than they've ever been able to do in the past.
So this, as I mentioned kind of earlier, this idea of digital disruption where, you know, really that buying cycle has changed so much, and it's really a struggle for marketing and sales to really get engaged with customers. I think that, you know, sort of that efficiency quotient is really kind of, you know, in this time, in this period, it's really a critical thing to look at. So. Yeah.
There's some interesting sort of numbers that I think are worthwhile sharing. At the hard end of ROI, if we start looking at how much do you invest and how much do you get out of it, there are companies like PGI Connect, for example, that have implemented Sales Navigator. They get over 200 times ROI. But there are also some fundamental leading indicators. And when you're adopting any change program, you really don't want to wait until the end of it to actually find out whether you're getting a good result. So be it whether you're increasing your pipeline, whether you're increasing your prospecting throughput, there are a lot of things that you can look at. But the good news is that we've created a social selling index, which effectively is a scoring mechanism for evaluating anybody, how effective they are in a social selling environment. And a lot of organizations we've seen that are adopting this as a change program are leveraging social selling index to help transform their organization. So it really encourages the kind of behavior that you want to see the sales reps changing, because at the end of the day we want to encourage the sales reps to change and work in a slightly different way to the traditional ways they've been doing. So things like creating the professional brand that we've already talked about, things like finding the right people, things like engaging with insights and sharing the right content, and lastly building strong relationships. So all of those things are how you would want your sales reps to engage on social media and how to engage in social selling. And we can effectively measure that. So it becomes a very powerful mechanism for you to be able to see how you're improving and how to drive that transformation. Yeah. And there's some very solid evidence that shows people with high SSI are 50% more likely to make quota. They typically have somewhere around 45% more opportunities in their pipeline. From a personal perspective, we've even managed to tie back to President's Club. So you're 3 times more likely to achieve President's Club status if you have a high SSI. And you're typically 18 months or so quicker to get promoted. So there's something in there for everyone, be it the business that are looking to transform and get results, but also in terms of a personal motivation for a person to engage and transform themselves.
Sure. Yeah. Carmel, from an Oracle perspective or from your experience, you know, how do you measure success and how do you kind of view your return on investment?
Sure. Well, we look at, as Kevin said, a lot of the metrics. I mean, it is very data driven, and that's the benefit of social selling. So we look at qualitative metrics and also then quantitative. So every quarter we do a social audit and we actually measure the impact on the pipeline and revenue and really drill down to the bottom line, you know, to find those success stories. And we look at the pipeline, how it's progressing, you know, the nurturing impact, but actually as it moves through the sales cycle, how is it impacting our forecasting and the accuracy there. So definitely I would agree, you know, we have looked at our top performers and also their activity on social to see is there a correlation and is that making an impact to the bottom line. In addition, I suppose, for new reps who come into the business, you know, how we sell this to them ultimately is that this is a new skill set. So I think in terms of adopting social selling, you know, at an executive level, it's a change in mindset, you know, a change in skill set, and certainly a change in tool set. But for the individual sales rep, this is something, a skill set they'll bring with them, you know, in their current career, their future career, and it's really helping them, I suppose, to stand out from, you know, the midst of their competitors effectively.
Sure. Yeah.
And I suppose I would say as well, certainly for us, as I mentioned earlier, the marketing engagement has been critical to the success factor in terms of helping us and helping the reps, you know, build on their social presence, their reputation. You know, we're using tools such as the Oracle Marketing Cloud internally, which gives reps the visibility of that digital body language. Effectively, what are customers actually doing online? What are they engaging with as they consume that content? What's resonating with them? And for a sales rep, that really gives them an indication of a hot lead and how they can progress it further.
Sure.
We're also encouraging the reps to adopt social listening. So to even go earlier in the conversation and before they engage with a decision maker, to actually understand their pain points, their challenges, and to be then relevant and timely with the right solution and messaging as appropriate.
Interesting.
And I think to build off of that, there's two things. Number one is that social listening is so important. It's not just about connecting with people, but it's also about learning. So what are those watering holes that particular buyer types that we're trying to sell to? Where are they spending their time? What are they asking about? But we have to be careful. There's kind of the potential stalker level that reps can start to fall into, where they spend that time looking, and then when they pick up the phone or they get that face-to-face opportunity, they're spewing out all this information they know about this particular person, and all of a sudden it's a little bit of a defensive reaction from the buyer side that says, whoa, hold on. So we have to also make sure they're translating that into more of a knowledge capability for it. The other side is your comment around looking at the individuals in our business. We have such a broad demographic out in the sales organization and the buyer community. Gen X, Gen Y, baby boomers, some much more used to social tools because they've grown up with them. Others, this is a much different concept. So our ability to also help them understand what they need to transform in the way they conduct themselves, as well as who they're selling to. If you're selling into the high-tech space and you're selling to a lot of startups, you have a high social activity level. More established manufacturing, insurance. Then we have to think about, well, how social are they? And giving them that capability to understand what they do with that tool so that we don't end up getting a negative effect from the performance. You know, that really eager young sales rep who uses social for everything, personally and business oriented, goes into a sales call, walks out and says, I just had a great sales call with this offering on the table with company ABC. We just broadcast that out to the entire business community. Now your competitors know about it. So we have to kind of also think about those individuals from a training perspective on a very demographic level as well.
So you brought up a good point, you know, kind of this idea of obviously enablement is huge. What are the tools that we're seeing in the market that are effective to support social selling?
Well, you know, certainly LinkedIn. You can't have this conversation without talking about it. We're seeing Twitter as a big one, but I think what's now starting to happen is also a lot of the collaboration tools that are starting to really swell within organizations from an impact perspective. Even if it's from the most basic of using Chatter within Salesforce.com as a way to internally drive social connections within your business, or Yammer or Jive, or things that are taking now what we do personally from a social perspective, the translation into what a lot of organizations are doing, social selling, so outwardly focused, and also now starting to bring that internal to our organization to say, how do we collaborate? Now, I think what's important for organizations to really focus on, and you mentioned this, Carmel, is there's lots of tools. What's the right direction? What are the ones that impact us best? And what are the ones that we should really focus on? So how do we start to really limit the number of tools and get it to the ones that fit our need and get us best aligned to our goals?
Sure, okay. Carmel, so I think you've touched on a few different tools that you guys are working with.
Sure.
What
yeah.
do you find
obviously we're
effective?
covering EMEA, so it's very diverse in terms of culture, regions, and very much we need, we've understood that you need to really research the market. So tools like in Germany, like Xing is very popular, ICO. Even in Russia, there's different platforms. So, we're really using a multitude of tools and ensuring that they're appropriate for the rep in the region. And even how they use those tools can vary. I've heard good examples in LinkedIn of how reps are using it in the Nordics versus in the Middle East. So one size doesn't fit all. I think that's really important to understand that and to ensure that you adhere to the local culture appropriately.
Good point. Yeah. So I guess, where do we see social selling going? What does the next 5 years, 10 years look like? What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think it's the new norm. I mean, in the same way email displaced standard, regular mail, social selling is the new modus operandi for selling. It gives you that ability to connect with buyers in the way they want to connect. I mean, typically, 75% of decision makers or budget holders are engaging in social media to help guide them researching, they're investigating, they're qualifying on social media. If you go to the CXO level, or $1 million spend plus, typically that rises to about 85%. So the buyers are there. So if the salespeople are not responding to where the buyers are congregating, where they're operating, then I think fundamentally you're missing a trick. And I think we'll see that continue, right? I think we'll see greater engagement. I think we'll see organizations just getting much better at how they engage on social media and the social platforms. I think we'll see the marketing coming together much more closely with sales. We've already talked a little bit about that. But I think that's a huge opportunity to collaborate, because disseminating information in an authentic way, in a genuine way that responds to buyers' needs is really, really paramount. And that's the way that we're going to see selling operating in the future.
Yeah. So Carmel, I guess for you and your social selling strategy, what's next? What does the future hold for you guys? What do you want to do?
It's continuing. We are scaling it out further,
Yeah.
but I suppose it's always going back to what are the measures of success? Are they still relevant? What do we need to tweak and change and improve? And it's looking at the next level, I think, of content sharing, gamification, and really driving the adoption further. For me, it's not a nice-to-have sales tactic anymore. It really should be part of sales methodology. And I'm hearing our sales leaders, discussing this in deal reviews and pipeline discussions. So it is becoming business as usual and should be really just part of the daily sales routine.
Sure.
Yeah.
And Mark,
so I think to Kevin's point, in a couple of years, I don't think we'll be saying social selling. It's going to be selling. It's really become integrated into the norm of how organizations engage with buyers or try and engage with buyers. So I think what we're going to start to see is a greater merging of the tools. So the integration of social selling tools that we see today into Salesforce automation platforms, where it's just an expected norm that we can connect those together. We can see the social interactions going on right at the account level, right at the opportunity level, and really start to see sales reps just looking at it, to your point, the same way they look at email, the same way they look at picking up the phone and calling, having to just have that as a skill and knowledge component. That is just a requirement of being able to engage with buyers. So I think the term is going to somewhat dissipate because it just will become selling.
Sure. Yeah. It's interesting how it kind of brings us back full circle to sort of our initial conversation about sales reps and their standard tools that they use. So interesting. Yeah. So we're coming to the end of our time here today. But before we go, I just wanted to thank our panel. Kevin Scott from LinkedIn, Carmela Boyle from Oracle, and Mark Levinson from SiriusDecisions for their insights and their time.